I raised my sister's kids, while she partied for years. Now she's married and wants them back like nothing happened. She says I was just babysitting, but they call me Mom. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tattered blinds of the modest duplex on Ashwood Lane, casting gold-dusted lines across the hardwood floor, scratched from years of toy trucks, tiny sneakers, and desperate pacing in the dead of night. In the quiet stillness, broken only by the distant whir of passing traffic and the faint laughter of children playing outside, Maren Hart stood at the kitchen sink, her hands deep in dishwater, her eyes unseeing. Her thoughts were far from the clatter of cutlery and the scent of lemon soap. They hovered somewhere between the weight of 1,000 bedtime stories and the shattering echo of a phone call that had come exactly 2 weeks ago. The call that had reawakened a storm she had long buried under lullabies and science fair projects. Tessa was back. The name, once innocent, now carried a venom that seared every time it surfaced. Tessa Hart, beautiful, reckless, irresponsible Tessa, who had once burst into motherhood with cigarette smoke in her hair and rebellion in her grin, only to vanish into the night with promises to return. She had left behind more than just children. She had abandoned the very bones of her responsibility, and Maren, without ceremony or consent, had gathered those bones and built a home. It hadn't been heroic. There were no violins in the background, no glossy images of tear-streaked triumph. It had started with a knock on the door at 3:27 a.m. 7 years ago, when Tessa appeared with mascara like war paint and her 2 toddlers clinging to her legs. Daniel, barely 4, and Emma, still in diapers, her thumb tucked in her mouth and eyes rimmed with confusion. Tessa's voice had been a slurry of guilt and excuses. Something about a new job. Something about just for a little while. A haze of perfume, cheap vodka, and poor decisions. Maren, then 28, unmarried and untethered, had no idea that a little while would turn into a permanence written not in ink, but in memory. Daniel's first scraped knee on the cracked sidewalk outside their building, Emma's fevered cries at 2 a.m, their first decorated tree with paper stars and trembling hope, the letters to Santa that Maren answered herself with trembling hands because no child should ever feel forgotten. Years passed like falling leaves, never noticed until the branches stood bare, and in those years, she had become something more than an aunt. She had become the moon they howled to, the arms that lifted them when they stumbled, the keeper of monsters beneath the bed and secrets too painful for a young heart to hold alone. She had watched Daniel's boyish innocence harden into preteen defiance, not out of malice, but out of fear that his mother might walk through the door again, as if love was a fire escape. Emma, soft-spoken and star-eyed, had once asked Maren why she didn't grow inside her belly. Maren had smiled and whispered, "Because you grew inside my heart." That answer had been enough for Emma. It had to be enough for Maren. But now Tessa had returned, and she wanted them back. She was married now, she said, her voice slick with new entitlement, and a veneer of stability that smelled like a Pinterest board and a second-hand redemption arc. Her husband, a man Maren had never met, wore suits and carried confidence like a business card. He stood beside Tessa in the lawyer's office 2 Thursdays ago, nodding solemnly as she explained to Maren, without so much as a trace of apology, that she was ready to resume her role as a mother, that she had been going through a rough patch, that she was grateful for the babysitting, as if 7 years of scraped knees, missed promotions, forgotten birthdays of her own, and endless nights of tears had been a favor, as if the sacrifices hadn't carved valleys into her very soul. And now, the unthinkable. A letter had arrived this morning, folded neatly in a white envelope, postmarked with indifference. It was from their lawyer, Tessa and the husband with the ironed smile, invoking her legal rights as the biological mother and requesting a voluntary return of custody. Voluntary, as though motherhood were something Maren had borrowed and now must give back like a worn library book. A clatter broke her reverie. Emma had entered the kitchen, dragging her blanket like a cape, hair tousled from her nap, eyes still swimming in dreams. She was 11 now, with a quiet wisdom that had grown in the shadows of her mother's absence. "Mama," she murmured, the words small but full of permanence. Maren's chest tightened, not because Emma had called her that, she had for years, but because the word was now under siege. "Yes, baby," she replied, wiping her hands on a dish towel that had seen better years, Emma pointed toward the dining table, where her science project lay half-finished. "Can you help me finish the model volcano? Mr. Salazar said it has to erupt." The simplicity of the request, the trust folded into it, made Marin want to scream. Instead, she nodded and offered a smile she barely managed to keep from cracking. "Let's make it explode." That night, long after the vinegar had fizzed through baking soda and Emma had fallen asleep with glue on her fingers and satisfaction in her eyes, Marin sat on the edge of her own bed, staring into the dark. Her thoughts churned with the weight of what came next. She had no legal documents. Tessa had never signed over guardianship. They had lived in a fragile truce, sustained by silence and distance. She had never expected this return, this claim, this arrogance masquerading as maternal instinct reawakened. And what hurt more than anything was the betrayal not from Tessa, but from her own parents. Their voices over the phone yesterday still rang in her ears. "She's their mother, Marin. Maybe it's time." Time. The irony of that word. As if time could be reversed, undone, made irrelevant. As if the past 7 years were simply a long intermission between acts in Tessa's chaotic play. They didn't know the nights Emma had cried over a drawing she'd made of a real family. How Daniel had punched a kid in school for saying his mother was a junkie. How Marin had held both of them through every storm without once letting them see how close she was to breaking. No one had seen, and now everyone seemed to forget. She walked to the kids' room, opened the door quietly. Daniel, now almost a teenager, was sprawled on his bed, headphones on, lost in the glow of his tablet. Emma lay tangled in blankets, her chest rising and falling with the soft rhythm of childhood dreams. Marin leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, fighting the ache in her throat. They were hers. Not because of DNA, but because when the world forgot them, she had remembered every detail. She had remembered their favorite cereals, the way Daniel liked his socks folded, how Emma always wanted her apple slices peeled. She remembered every fever, every recital, every fight, and every forgiveness. She remembered loving them when it wasn't easy, when it wasn't fair, when it wasn't supposed to be hers to carry. Now, she would have to remember how to fight, and the war, she knew, was just beginning. There are moments in life so heavy they steal the sound from the world, dragging silence like a shroud over everything it touches. Marin felt that silence now, thick and cloying as she sat alone in the attorney's office, her hands wrapped tightly around a ceramic mug of untouched coffee. It had gone cold an hour ago, but she held it anyway, needing something to grip besides her own trembling resolve. The air around her was stale with recycled sorrow and the muted rustle of legal paper. She didn't belong here, not because she was unworthy, far from it, but because everything about this place reeked of a reality she had fought for years to avoid. Custody, visitation, biological rights. It all boiled down to words on documents, clauses in agreements, signatures and stamps. Paper meant everything now. More than scraped knees, more than lullabies, more than the million little acts of love that had gone unwitnessed, unrecorded, unpaid. Across the desk sat Hannah Mirren, a family law attorney recommended by a friend who had seen firsthand how deeply the family court system could wound. A woman in her late 40s with sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes, Hannah had listened to Marin's story with the stoicism of someone who had heard it all before. Except even she had paused, briefly, when Marin had mentioned the length of the abandonment. 7 years, Marin had repeated. Not a single family festival. Not one birthday. No letters, no calls, not even a text. Just silence, like we stopped existing. Hannah had nodded slowly, adjusting her reading glasses. "And you never obtained legal guardianship?" "No," Marin admitted, her voice hollow. "It always felt temporary. Like if I did, it would mean she wasn't coming back. And back then, I didn't want to believe that." Hannah had scribbled something on a yellow legal pad. That's going to make things more complicated, but not impossible. Now the silence between them was filled only with the faint ticking of a wall clock and the weight of unspoken possibilities. When Hannah finally spoke again, her voice was measured, careful, but unwavering. "She's filed for full custody. She claims she's reestablished stability, citing her recent marriage, a permanent address, gainful employment, and counseling. She's leaning hard into the narrative of rehabilitation. Maren let out a bitter laugh, soft and sharp. Rehabilitation, like she was sick and now she's cured. Hannah didn't return the smile. Family court judges don't look for perfection. They look for evidence of capacity. The fact that she's trying now carries weight, even if she failed for years. So I get punished, Maren said flatly, for never failing them. The lawyer looked at her, eyes softening only slightly. You'll need more than emotion. You'll need proof. Photos, school records, testimonies from teachers, doctors, neighbors. Anything that paints a picture of consistency, of care. The law doesn't reward love. It rewards documentation. The words slammed into her chest. The law doesn't reward love. It rewards documentation. As though her motherhood had been some unlicensed project, alone without receipts. The idea of reducing their life to paperwork made her skin crawl. But she nodded. Because this was war now, and wars were not won on sentiment. Later that evening, the kids sat at the kitchen table, Emma practicing cursive with her tongue sticking slightly out, while Daniel pored over a biology textbook, tapping a pencil against his temple in the rhythm of growing frustration. Maren watched them from the doorway, her heart aching with an intensity she could no longer suppress. They looked so ordinary in that moment, just two children, unaware of the storm tightening its grip around their lives. She hated what she was about to do, but she couldn't afford delay. "Hey, guys," she said gently, walking over and setting her hands on the table. "Can we talk for a second?" Emma looked up immediately, sensing the change in her tone. Daniel, more guarded, closed his book and leaned back, eyes narrowed in that way that had become increasingly familiar since he turned 12. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice cracking just slightly with the edge of anxiety he refused to show. Maren sat down. She folded her hands on the table to stop them from shaking. "I need to talk to you about your mom, about Tessa." Emma's fingers stilled on her worksheet. Daniel didn't blink. "She wants to see you, and she's asked for custody." Daniel scoffed. "Of us?" Maren nodded. "She's saying she's ready now, that she can be your mom again." For a long moment, neither child said anything. The quiet was so thick Maren felt like she couldn't breathe. Then Daniel stood up so fast his chair scraped across the floor. "She doesn't even know me," he said, voice rising. "She didn't call, not once. Not for my birthday, not when I got my black belt, not when I broke my arm last year. Where was she?" Maren reached for him, but he backed away, shaking his head. "She's not my mom. You are." Emma's eyes welled up and she crawled onto Maren's lap without a word, burying her face in her chest. Maren held her tightly, swallowing the sob that threatened to break loose. "I don't want to go," Emma whispered. "I don't remember her." Maren kissed the top of her head, trying not to tremble. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you stay right here. But we need to be ready. It's not going to be easy." Daniel was pacing now, fists clenched. "So what? We have to prove we're happy? That we want to stay?" "Sort of," Maren admitted. "We'll talk to someone from the court, a social worker. They'll ask questions about your lives here, about how you feel." "What if we say we hate her?" Daniel asked, his voice dark. "You don't have to lie," Maren said quietly. "Just be honest. That's all I ask. Tell the truth. About everything." The days that followed blurred into a fevered whirlwind of activity. Maren gathered school reports, medical records, photos spanning birthdays, holidays, everyday moments. She reached out to their pediatrician who had watched Emma grow from a toddler into a young girl, and to Daniel's martial arts instructor, who had often praised Maren for her steady presence. Their school counselor agreed to write a letter. A neighbor, Mrs. Klein, who had babysat once in a blue moon, provided a statement about Maren's devotion, citing the time Emma had fallen ill during a snowstorm, and Maren had walked 3 miles through knee-deep snow to get her medication when the roads were closed. But for all the support, the shadow of the court date loomed like a guillotine, and with it came the whispers. At the grocery store, a woman Maren vaguely recognized from high school approached her by the produce aisle. "I heard your sister's back. That must be awkward," she said with a smirk that barely masked her condescension. At Daniel's school, another parent murmured, "Blood is blood, right?" to someone just loud enough for Maren to hear. Even her own father, during a rare phone call, offered a hesitant, "Maybe Tessa deserves a second chance." Second chances, as if she'd been denied one. as if Maren hadn't sacrificed her entire adult life for children that weren't even biologically hers. One night, as she sat on the porch steps with a glass of black coffee she couldn't taste, Daniel joined her in silence. He stared up at the sky, his jaw tight. "Do we have to go to court?" She nodded slowly. "I'm afraid so." He exhaled sharply. "I don't want to stand in front of strangers and explain why I love you." Maren swallowed the lump in her throat. "Then don't explain why you love me. Just tell them who you are, who we are, what home means to you." He didn't answer right away. Then softly, "You know what I remember?" "What?" "That night I had a nightmare about the fire. I was 5. I thought the house was burning down. You wrapped me in that blanket, the orange one with the stars, and you held me on the floor until morning." She remembered it too, his tiny body trembling, tears soaking her shirt, her arms numb from holding him all night. "You never let go," he whispered. "I never will," she said. And in that moment, she wasn't afraid. Not of the court, not of Tessa, not of the world unraveling around her. Because no matter what anyone said, no matter what paper declared, love wasn't something that could be undone. It lived in memories, in muscle, in the marrow of every moment they had survived together. And she was ready to fight, with everything she had. There is a strange stillness in the hour before a storm, a kind of sacred hush that clings to the edges of breath and thought like mist. It was that same quiet Maren felt now, sitting in the hallway outside courtroom 3B, her palms pressed tightly together in her lap, fingers interlocked in a grip that might have drawn blood if she weren't so used to bracing herself for pain. The courthouse smelled of linoleum and old decisions. Everything about it, the flickering fluorescence above, the buzz of distant printers, the murmur of footsteps over tile, felt clinical, impersonal, indifferent. The kind of place where lives were decided not by who loved hardest, but by who spoke best. Daniel sat beside her, wearing the button-down shirt he had insisted he didn't care about, but still made sure was ironed the night before. He was quiet, his knees bouncing slightly, the only betrayal of the storm behind his composure. Across from them, Emma leaned into her own silence, her small fingers clutching the edges of her backpack like it might anchor her to the world. They were waiting for the case to be called. Tessa stood down the hallway, radiant in the way only a woman used to reclaiming rooms could be. Her hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, a pristine blouse tucked into tailored slacks, every inch of her curated for the role of redemption. At her side was Grant, the husband she'd married less than a year ago, wearing a navy suit and the vague arrogance of a man who believed courtrooms were chessboards. His arm was around Tessa's waist, his hand resting lightly, performatively, like he was rehearsing fatherhood one affectionate gesture at a time. Maren tried not to look at them, but the weight of their presence bore down like gravity. Tessa was smiling, not the kind of smile that hinted at nervousness or uncertainty. It was polished, poised, like she believed she had already won. Hannah Mirren arrived moments later, her presence a quiet assurance. She walked with purpose, her briefcase swinging at her side, eyes already scanning the hallway as though calculating trajectories. "They're going to paint her as a recovering mother," she said under her breath as she sat beside Maren. "Changed, reformed. She's been volunteering at the local church, working with a youth program, attending therapy, all things meant to show personal growth." "She's never asked about their allergies," Maren said flatly. "I know. She doesn't even know Emma's scared of fireworks." "I know. Or that Daniel still flinches when someone slams a door." "Maren," Hannah said gently but firmly, placing a hand on her shoulder, "we'll get that across. Today isn't just about who gave birth. It's about who never left." The door to courtroom 3B opened. A clerk stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Custody hearing for Hart versus Hart," he called. And so they rose, Maren, Daniel, Emma, Hannah, and walked into the room where love would be weighed against legality. The judge was an older man with a weary face and eyes that had seen too many families unravel before him. His nameplate read, Honorable Joseph Thorne, and he spoke with the practiced authority of someone who had long since stopped expecting resolution to be clean or kind. "Let's begin," he said, adjusting his glasses as both parties took their seats. Opening statements were made. Grant's attorney, a sleek woman with high heels that clicked with precision, spoke first. She painted Tessa as a mother who had struggled, yes, but had taken responsibility. She emphasized the marriage, the home, the new career. She talked about therapy, about how Tessa had expressed guilt over missing so much of her children's early years, but was determined to make things right. She even referenced a journal Tessa had allegedly kept, letters she'd written to Daniel and Emma over the years, unsent but heartfelt. Then Hannah rose, her voice steady, her presence quiet, but commanding. "Your Honor, we are not here to question biology. We are here to question the nature of parenthood." Maren Hart did not plan to become a mother. She did not sign up for this. But when her sister left 2 children on her doorstep in the middle of the night and disappeared into silence, Maren didn't hesitate. She stepped in, and she stayed. Through nightmares, through school plays, through doctor visits and scraped knees and hard conversations about abandonment. For over 7 years, she has raised these children with consistency, love, and sacrifice. The biological mother claims she is ready now. That should not erase the years of parenting Maren has already given. The judge listened, impassive. Witnesses were called. A social worker who had conducted interviews with the children testified first. Both children referred to Maren as Mom during the home visit, she said. They spoke with love, familiarity, and a deep sense of security. Daniel, in particular, expressed concern that a change in custody would disrupt his schooling, friendships, and emotional well-being. Emma was more reserved, but visibly distressed when asked about leaving Maren's home. Next came a teacher, Emma's 4th grade instructor. "I've seen how Emma lights up when Maren comes to school events. There's never been a question in my mind about who she considers her parent. That kind of bond doesn't happen by accident." Then the pediatrician, the neighbor, the school counselor. Each one reinforced the same narrative. Maren was the constant. Maren was the caregiver. Maren was the one who stayed. Then Tessa took the stand. Her voice broke on cue. Her eyes shimmered just right. She spoke of postpartum depression, of feeling unworthy, of spiraling into bad decisions and surrounding herself with the wrong people. But now, she said, she had found faith, stability, love, a fresh start. "They're my babies," she said, choking slightly. "And I know I wasn't there. I hate myself for that. But I'm ready now. I've changed. I just want a chance to be their mother again." Grant sat behind her, dabbing at the corner of his eye with a handkerchief like a man playing the part of the supportive stepfather to perfection. Then it was Maren's turn. She took the stand, knees weak, breath shallow. But she spoke. She spoke about the night Tessa dropped them off, about the months without word, about the first time Daniel had a nightmare and called out Mommy, and she had gone to him and held him and didn't correct him, about Emma's fevers, about learning how to braid hair on YouTube just to make her smile, about bills and grocery lists and bedtime stories and how every part of her life had been rebuilt around these children. "I never asked to be their mother," Maren said, her voice thick with emotion, "but I became one, and I love them like they're my own. I've loved them when it was hard, when it was lonely, when no one else was there to see it. And they love me back. That bond isn't temporary. It wasn't borrowed, it's real. I didn't just babysit them. I raised them." The courtroom was silent when she stepped down. Even the judge's pen had stopped moving. Later that afternoon, the children were brought in, one at a time, to speak privately with the judge in his chambers. The court called it in-camera testimony, a sterile name for something sacred. Maren watched as Daniel squared his shoulders and walked in, his back straight, his eyes steady. He didn't glance at Tessa. He didn't hesitate. Emma went in next, holding Hannah's hand the entire way. When they returned, Daniel went straight to Maren and sat down, jaw clenched. Emma climbed into her lap without a word. The court recessed for deliberation. Hours passed, long, aching hours. Outside, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the marble floor. Maren sat on the bench outside the courtroom, her children on either side of her, the 3 of them quiet but connected, a constellation of love forged not by blood, but by choice. When the doors opened again, the judge looked tired, older somehow than he had that morning. He called both parties to stand. His voice, when he spoke, was deliberate, weighted with the complexity of what he was about to say. This case has not been easy. The court acknowledges the biological connection of Ms. Tessa Hart to the children. However, custody is not merely a matter of biology. It is a matter of best interest. The evidence presented strongly indicates that the children have formed a deep, stable, and nurturing bond with their aunt, Maren Hart, who has served as their de facto mother for over 7 years. Removing them from that environment would, in the opinion of this court, cause significant emotional harm. He paused. Tessa inhaled sharply. Therefore, primary physical custody will remain with Maren Hart. Tessa Hart will be granted supervised visitation with the opportunity to petition for expanded visitation rights contingent upon the children's comfort and the demonstration of consistent involvement over time. The gavel fell, and just like that, the law had finally seen what love had already proven. But there was no celebration in Maren's heart, no victory lap, because even in winning, something had broken. Tessa stood in the hallway afterward, her eyes glazed, lips trembling. She didn't approach, didn't speak. She just stared, at Maren, at the children, at the life she had forfeited, and then turned away, Grant's hand tightening on her shoulder as they left in silence. Later that night, back at home, Emma curled up beside Maren on the couch, her head on her shoulder, whispering, "Do we get to stay here forever now?" Maren kissed her forehead, blinking back tears. "Yes," she said, "forever." But in her heart, she knew forever was never promised, and she would never stop fighting to make it so. The weeks after the verdict unraveled like a gentle ache, familiar, persistent, but no longer dangerous. For the first time in years, Maren could exhale without bracing herself for the crash of a past she had never asked for. The children were hers, legally now, not just emotionally, not just spiritually. It hadn't made things easier necessarily, but it had made them real in a way that mattered to the world outside their front door. She kept the court documents tucked inside a thick manila folder in the kitchen drawer, beneath a jumble of expired coupons and instruction manuals for appliances long since broken. It wasn't a trophy. It was a wound she had stitched shut with paper and ink, and she didn't like to look at it more than she had to. But sometimes, when her doubt whispered too loud, she opened that drawer, pulled out that folder, and reminded herself, this wasn't a story borrowed. It was one she had written in the margins of chaos, with the blood and breath of love. Spring came early that year. The trees bloomed as if they'd forgotten what winter ever was, and the neighborhood was flushed with the soft colors of things beginning again. On one of those golden afternoons, Maren stood on the back porch with a glass of iced tea, watching Emma and Daniel chase each other across the lawn. Emma had grown 2 inches in 3 months and insisted on measuring her height every Sunday morning against the hallway wall, just to prove it. Daniel had taken up sketching, angry, messy lines at first, but they'd started forming shapes now. He said he might want to design video games one day. She said he already designed stories with the way he saw the world. They were healing. Not all at once, not perfectly, but healing in the quiet, ordinary ways that mattered most. And then, on a Thursday morning in late April, the letter came. Maren found it in the mailbox tucked between a utility bill and a community flyer about the spring fair. It was handwritten on the envelope, her name curved in slanted cursive she hadn't seen in years. No return address, no stamp. Dropped off in person. Her chest tightened. She didn't open it immediately. She left it on the kitchen counter while she made breakfast, flipped pancakes, packed lunch boxes, tied shoelaces, and sent the kids out the door with hugs and warnings not to dawdle. Only once the house was empty again, quiet again, did she sit at the table, slide her thumb under the seal, and read. Maren, this isn't a plea. I know that window is closed. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I just wanted you to hear me say what I never had the courage to say when it mattered. Thank you. For not slamming the door the night I dropped them off. For raising them when I couldn't even take care of myself. For being more of a mother than I ever was. I thought time would erase what I did. That one day I'd wake up and the shame wouldn't feel like fire under my skin. But it doesn't go away. And it shouldn't. I've started over. Not in the fairy tale way I wanted everyone to believe during court. Grant and I are separated. I think I married him because I wanted to be saved. But no one can do that for you. I'm trying to become someone who deserves forgiveness. Not from the world, from them, from you. I don't expect it, but I'm working toward it anyway. Tell them I love them, if it doesn't hurt too much to hear it from me. And if someday, years from now, they want to find me, I'll be waiting, with no expectations, just hope. Take care of them. Not that I need to say it. You always have. Tessa Marin read it 3 times. Not because she didn't understand it the first time, but because some things require repetition to settle into the places they're meant to live. She didn't cry. There were no tears left for Tessa, only a sorrow so deep it no longer stung, just settled. She burned the letter in the fire pit that night, not out of hatred, but because some truths belong to smoke and sky and silence. The seasons turned. Summer arrived, heavy with the scent of cut grass and sunscreen. The kids ran through sprinklers, slept in late, made forts from sofa cushions. Daniel got his first job walking dogs in the neighborhood. Emma took up baking and nearly burned the kitchen twice. Marin taught her how to separate yolks from whites, how to fold ingredients instead of stirring too hard. They laughed through flour clouds, burned cookies, and lopsided cakes. In July, Marin finalized the adoption. There had been no fight left in Tessa, no appeal. Just a quiet, signed surrender. A recognition that some things, once broken, couldn't be rebuilt. The paperwork went through, and with it came a new set of birth certificates, new names printed neatly. Mother, Marin Elise Hart. The kids hadn't needed it. They already called her mom. They already saw her as the center of their orbit. But the law had finally caught up with the truth they had always known. On the morning of the adoption hearing, Marin wore a navy blue dress and a silver locket with their baby pictures tucked inside. Emma wore a sunflower yellow sundress and clutched a small bouquet of daisies she had picked from the front yard. Daniel wore his tie crooked and rolled his eyes when Marin fixed it. But he didn't stop her. The judge who presided over the hearing wasn't Thorne. He had retired. But the new one smiled when he looked over the file. "You've got quite the journey here," he said, flipping through pages. "You know, most stories like this don't end with everyone still standing." Marin just smiled. "We didn't just stand," she said. "We grew." That night, they celebrated with pizza and strawberry milkshakes at the little diner on the corner where Marin used to take them on Friday nights when they were small and money was tighter than breath. The booth was still cracked, the jukebox still half broken. It felt like a time capsule, but they had outgrown it just enough for the nostalgia to feel sweet instead of painful. Daniel leaned across the table, a slice of pizza in one hand, his voice casual. "So, do I have to start calling you Mother now?" Marin raised an eyebrow. "If you do, I'm legally allowed to ground you until college." He grinned, mouth full of cheese. Emma giggled. Later, as the sky turned dusky blue and the fireflies emerged to paint gold in the air, they walked home. Marin held Emma's hand. Daniel walked slightly ahead, pretending he wasn't waiting for them to catch up. In the quiet that settled around them, Marin realized something she hadn't dared hope for. The war was over. The battle for legitimacy, for recognition, for the right to call them hers. It was done. What remained wasn't a battlefield. It was a home. One with chipped walls and cluttered counters and loud mornings. One with laughter, tantrums, compromise, and love that showed up without fanfare. A love that folded laundry and checked math homework and remembered to pack Band-Aids in the glove box. A love that never left. Years later, on a quiet Sunday, Marin would sit in that same kitchen, sipping tea as she flipped through an old photo album. Her hair streaked with silver now, her hands lined with the years she had carried on her back. Daniel would be off at college, Emma applying to art schools, the house echoing with their absence in the way only a full life can echo. And still, they would call every week. Still, they would sign cards. "Love you, Mom." Still, they would come home for Thanksgiving, for family festival, for the kind of days where stories are told again just to be remembered better. They would never call anyone else Mother. Because no matter what the law had decided, no matter what Tessa had claimed or confessed, no matter how the past had frayed and fallen apart, there had only ever been one person who stayed, one person who chose them, and they had chosen her back, forever. Not by chance, but by love. The kind of love that needed no permission to be true.